Adrian, don't go home. That coffin is empty.
The old gravedigger suddenly gripped my hand. His hand was rough and as cold as stone. His voice was hoarse, just a whisper for my ears alone, in the middle of the funeral for my father, Arthur.
I froze. The world around me seemed to stop spinning. Empty, my father, the man I had just lowered into the grave myself, the man this whole city came to see off.
He wasn't in that coffin?
I stared at Marcus, the grave digger. His face was etched with the deep lines of time. His eyes were so serious they sent a chill down my spine.
There wasn't a hint of a joke in them.
Take this. He pressed an old brass key into my hand, along with an envelope yellowed and frayed at the corners. Your father told me to give this to you if this day ever came. He wants you to know the truth.
I took them, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The key felt heavy in my palm. The envelope was light, but I felt it held an earth-shattering secret. What does he want me to know?
I asked, my voice cracking, but Marcus had already turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the cemetery trees.
I stood there alone among the cold tombstones. The evening wind whistled through the leaves, creating eerie sounds. My father, Arthur, a successful businessman and a model father.
But to me he was always an enigma, an impenetrable fortress I could never reach.
I'm Adrian, his only son. For the past 25 years I've lived in his shadow. I tried to become the man he wanted me to be, but we never really talked.
Never truly understood each other.
And now that he was gone, everything felt more hazy than ever. Empty? Is my father still alive, or is this some cruel joke of fate? Just then, the phone in my pocket buzzed. It was a message from my mother, Elena, the woman who had been standing beside me just moments ago, crying uncontrollably by my father's grave.
The message was short and surprisingly cold. Come home now, alone.
My heart pounded. Why alone? Why did my mother text instead of call? A sense of unease grew stronger than ever. Marcus's words the key, and now this message from my mother.
It was all a maze with no way out.
I looked towards the cemetery gate. My mother's car was long gone. I knew I couldn't go home right now. My instincts told me something extremely dangerous was waiting for me there. I drove through the night. The suburban roads were unusually quiet. 1,000 questions were screaming in my head. If my father isn't dead, then who's in the coffin?
And why would he do something so horrific?
I felt my breath catch. Protect us? From what? And why did everything have to be so secret? Isabella led me to an old wooden table. She opened a thick, discolored file.
Adrian, she began, her voice low and sad. Your father wasn't a hero, but he wasn't a bad man either. 20 years ago, he made a huge mistake in business.
A failed investment caused many people to lose everything. Among them was Sebastian, a close friend of your father's.
Sebastian couldn't accept that reality. He turned his pain into an extreme hatred. For years, Sebastian silently stalked your family. He didn't use violence right away. He chose mental torture.
He sent veiled threats. He sabotaged your father's business projects from the shadows.
Your father tried to make amends, but it was never enough for a man who had lost everything. When Sebastian started targeting you and your mother, your father knew he had to do something drastic. He faked his death, so Sebastian would believe the debt had been paid with his life. He wanted Sebastian to stop and let your family live in peace. I looked at the photos on the wall, candid photos of my mother and me, taken over the last 10 years. It turned out my father had never been far away.
He had been living in this cramped room, eating simple meals just to be able to see us from a distance. A bitter lump formed in my throat. A wave of sorrow swelled in my chest. Why didn't Dad tell me? Why did he choose to bear this all alone?
Isabella placed a hand on my shoulder. Because he loves you more than his own life, Adrian. He would rather you resent him for being a distant father than have you live in fear every single day.
Just then, the metal door of the storage unit rattled again. A tall figure stepped inside. His posture was a bit stooped and his hair was white, but his eyes were unmistakable.
It was my father, Arthur. I was rooted to the spot. I couldn't believe my eyes. My father walked towards me, his trembling hands reaching out to touch my face. Adrian, my son, he whispered.
I couldn't hold back the tears, and I threw my arms around him. The warmth of us was real. His heartbeat was real. My father was alive.
But the reunion didn't last long. My father looked at my phone, where the message from my mother was still on the screen. Adrian, your mother is in danger, he said urgently.
Sebastian has gone to our house. That message wasn't from your mother telling you to come home. It was to warn you not to, but Sebastian probably forced her to send it.
We have to go now, my father said. This time, we're not running anymore. We're going to face Sebastian and end this, once and for all.
I looked at my father, the man who had faked his own death to protect me. I nodded. I'll go with you, Dad. The address on the envelope led me to an old storage facility, hidden behind rows of abandoned, rusting warehouses. There wasn't a soul in sight. Only the sound of wind whistling through the cracks of the metal containers.
I found unit number 17. The brass key fit perfectly into the old lock. A dry click echoed in the silence. The heavy metal door slowly creaked open.
Inside, there was no gold, no secret documents, just a small, simple room, a folding bed and an old wooden table, and on the wall I froze when I saw the photos.
Hundreds of photos of me and my mother. From when I was a toddler just learning to walk, to the day I graduated from college, my wedding day. And even photos of me standing in the cemetery just an hour ago. My father had always been there. He had always been watching me from the shadows. But why?
A small sound came from behind me. I spun around, my defenses kicking in. A woman stepped out from a dark corner of the room.
She was middle-aged, with a kind face, but her eyes were full of worry. "Adrian, you finally came," she said, her voice warm but tinged with infinite sadness. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I am Isabella, your father's only remaining friend."
She looked at me and let out a long sigh. "Your father is alive, but he has paid a very heavy price to protect you and your mother."
I felt my breath catch in my throat. Protect us? From what? And why did all of this have to be such a secret?
We stepped out of storage unit number 17. It was late now and the wind was biting cold. My father, Arthur, was driving. His thin hands gripped the steering wheel tightly.
I sat beside him, my heart racing.
"Adrian, listen to me," my father began, his voice surprisingly calm. "Sebastian isn't a cold-blooded killer. He's just a man who has lost his way. He wants justice, but he's been looking for it in the wrong way." I looked at my father and asked worriedly, "But what if he hurts Mom?" My father was silent for a moment, then answered, "Sebastian hates me, not your mother."
"He's using her as bait to draw me out of the shadows. Now that I've shown myself, your mother will be safe."
The car sped down the road leading to my family's old house, the house I grew up in, filled with happy memories. But now it felt like a trap lying in wait.
As we got closer, I saw a faint yellow light shining from the living room window. My father turned off the headlights and parked a distance away. "We'll walk in," he whispered. "Isabella has called a few old friends for remote backup, but I want to handle this myself first." I nodded, feeling my father's courage transferring to me. We snuck through the back garden. The rose bushes my mother cared for were still there. Through the glass door, I saw my mother, Elena, sitting on the sofa.
She looked calm, but her hands were clasped tightly together. Across from her sat a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair. That was Sebastian.
Sebastian was holding an old file and seemed to be saying something very intensely. My father signaled for me to stay back, then took a deep breath.
He pushed the door open and stepped into the living room.
"Hello, Sebastian. It's been a long time." My father's voice rang out, clear and strong. Sebastian froze, the file in his hands dropping to the floor. He turned around, his eyes wide with astonishment.
"Arthur?" he choked out, his voice trembling. "You're alive?"
My mother shot to her feet, tears streaming down her face. "Arthur!" she cried out. My father moved to stand between her and Sebastian. I entered the room too and stood by my father's side. Sebastian looked at the two of us, then laughed bitterly. "So it was all an act," Sebastian said. "You faked your own death to escape your responsibilities. You let me live in poverty while you hid like a coward." My father looked Sebastian straight in the eye. "I wasn't escaping, Sebastian. I faked my death to protect my family from your hatred. But I was wrong. Running away is never the solution." Sebastian stepped forward and grabbed my father by the collar. "Do you have any idea what I lost? I lost my family, my honor, and my entire future because of your gamble." My father didn't resist, I know, and I'm sorry, Sebastian. I spoke up to intervene. "Sebastian, please, calm down. My father has been secretly helping your family for the past 10 years. The anonymous payments for your daughter's college education, they came from my father."
Sebastian was stunned and released my father's collar. "What? What are you talking about?" Isabella entered from the front door, holding the proof of the money transfers. "It's true, Sebastian."
"Arthur has spent the last 10 years struggling, saving every single penny to repay you."
The room fell into complete silence. The only sound was my mother's choked sobs. Sebastian stared at the receipts, then back at my father. The rage in his eyes seemed to melt away. Sebastian sank onto the old sofa, his hands trembling as he held the receipts. The amounts were small but consistent for 10 long years. The center's name was always an alias.
But now the truth was laid out plainly before him.
"Why didn't you tell me?" Sebastian asked, his voice hoarse. "Why did you choose to disappear and let me live in hatred?"
My father, Arthur, moved closer and put a hand on his old friend's shoulder. because I knew you would never accept my help if you knew it came from me. My father continued, his voice low and sorrowful. I made a mistake that caused you to lose everything. I couldn't face you when I still had my own family.
I thought if I disappeared, your hatred for me might finally ease. But I was wrong, Sebastian. This hatred has only tormented us both.
Sebastian stared at the ceiling, his eyes bloodshot. Do you know what I was planning to do, Arthur? I was going to ruin your son's career.
I wanted you to feel what it's like to lose everything, just as I did. But Adrian, he's a good man. He reminds me of you back when we were young. My mother, Elena, came over and poured a glass of warm water, setting it in front of Sebastian. Drink this, Sebastian. We are all so tired of this past. Sebastian took the glass and took a small sip. The tension in the room seemed to melt away entirely.
I stood watching these two men, who had once been the best of friends. They'd spent one half of their lives building each other up, and the other half tearing each other down.
But now, in the silence, I saw the beginnings of understanding.
Mr. Sebastian, I said, my father was wrong to hide the truth, but everything he did out of love, and you were wrong to let hatred lead you. But now we can choose another path, the path of forgiveness.
Sebastian looked from me to my father. He let out a long sigh, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders.
I don't know if I can forgive you right away, Arthur, but I promise I will leave your family alone. I'm going to go home and try to start again.
My father smiled, his eyes twinkling with relief. Thank you, Sebastian. If you ever need any help getting back on your feet, I'm here for you. We still have time to start over.
Sebastian stood and adjusted his collar. He looked around the house one last time before heading for the door. Isabella accompanied him to ensure he was okay.
Before he left, Sebastian turned back and looked at me. You have a great father, Adrian. Never forget that.
I nodded, feeling a surge of pride. The door closed and only my family remained. My mother wrapped her arms around my father, sobbing. But this time they were tears of joy and relief.
Father looked at me and smiled. It's over now, son. We're finally free. I smiled back, feeling a strange warmth in my chest.
But I knew this was only the start of a new journey, the journey of healing.
The next morning, sunlight filtered through the cracks in the window blinds. Our old house no longer carried the gloom of the previous night.
My mother, Elena, was busy in the kitchen preparing breakfast for the family. The rich scent of coffee drifted through the rooms.
My father, Arthur, was sitting in his old armchair in the living room. He still looked exhausted, but there was a new peace in his eyes. I went and sat down next to him.
Dad, I said softly, we need to talk.
He looked at me and nodded slowly. I know, Adrian, I owe you more than a few explanations. For 10 years I've been living like a ghost.
I missed your wedding day. I missed the birth of your children. I'm sorry I left you to bear it all alone.
I took his frail hand. I don't blame you, Dad, not for protecting us. But it hurts me to know you went through all of it alone. Why didn't you trust me?
Why wouldn't you let me share that burden with you?
He let out a long sigh. Because I still thought of you as my little boy, Adrian. I wanted you to have a perfect life, one that wasn't stained by my mistakes.
I forgot that you had grown up and that you deserved the truth.
Mother walked in with a tray of steaming food. Breakfast is ready, you two. The past is over. Let's just cherish this moment. We sat down to our first breakfast together in 10 years.
The room felt warm, filled with an unspoken love. After breakfast, I took my father for a walk in the garden out back. The roses Mom planted were blooming vibrantly. He stopped in front of an old tree and smiled.
I planted this the day you were born, Adrian. It's still growing so strong.
Looking at my father, I felt a wonderful connection. I want you to move in with us, Dad. Celeste and the children would be overjoyed to have you there.
He was silent for a moment before shaking his head gently.
Thank you, Adrian. But your mother and I have discussed it. We'd like to move to a little house by the coast, to retire. I just want to live peacefully with your mother.
I've already cost her so much of her life.
I respected his decision. Then I'll help you and Mom find the perfect place, and we'll come visit often. He smiled, his eyes shining with happiness. Thank you, my son.
You truly are a man now.
In the days that followed, I helped Dad clean out storage unit number 15. Together, we went through old photos and memories from my childhood.
Each picture told a story, and each story was a testament to his love.
I came to realize that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about accepting it and learning to move on.
My father had made a terrible mistake, but his love for our family had never changed, and in the end, that's all that mattered. We heard from Isabella about Sebastian. He'd started working at a small auto shop and was trying to repair his relationship with his daughter.
The hate had finally receded, giving way to a fresh start.
Our family had started a new chapter, one free of secrets and lies. There was only honesty now, and gratitude for every single moment we could share together. 3 months had passed since that fateful night. My father, Arthur, and mother, Elena, had moved to a small house on the coast. It had a window overlooking the endless ocean.
Day and night the waves lapped at the shore like the murmuring heart of the sea.
My wife Celeste, our kids, and I would visit my parents every weekend. Seeing my children laughing on the beach with their grandfather filled me with a profound peace. My father looked much healthier.
His skin was darkened by the sun and the wind, but he always had a bright smile on his face.
Look over there, Adrian. My father pointed to the horizon as the sun began to set. A person's life is just like a day. It has a brilliant sunrise and a peaceful sunset.
What's important isn't the length of the day, but how you live and love through it.
I sat beside my father, breathing in the sharp, salty scent of the sea. I've learned so much from you, I said, about sacrifice and courage.
But the most important lesson of all was honesty. I will never let secrets divide our family ever again.
He patted my shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. That's right, son. The truth can hurt, but it's the only thing that sets us free. Never build your happiness on lies.
Even lies you tell out of love. We sat in silence, watching the sunset together. The last rays of the day stained the entire sky crimson. It made me realize that every scar from the past has its own worth. They remind us of the mistakes we've made, so we don't have to make them again. Mother Elena came out with a tray of hot tea, smiling as she looked at me and my father. Come now, my two men, have some tea.
Don't get so caught up in philosophy that you forget to enjoy the moment. We all laughed, our voices mixing with the sound of the ocean.
I thought back on this whole journey. Starting from that moment, I stood before my father's empty grave. It was a path from shock and anger to understanding and forgiveness.
I learned that everyone is fighting their own private battle, one we can't see, and because of that, we must always try to be kind and understanding.
Before it was time to leave, I gave my father a tight hug. I love you, Dad. He smiled and whispered back, I love you too, Adrian.
Thank you for forgiving this foolish old man.
As I drove my family back toward the city, I saw my parents' figures in the rearview mirror, waving from afar.
Their little house by the sea disappeared into the night, but the warmth of their love stayed with me, right here in my heart.
My friends, my family's story may be over, but yours is still unfolding. Don't let hatred or secrets erode your spirit. Be brave enough to open your heart and face the truth.
A person's true value isn't found in what they own, but in what they sacrifice for those they love. Cherish every single moment with your family, because life is short and all too fragile.
Thank you for listening to my story here on The Final Letter. I hope that my experiences can help you find a light in the darkest moments of your life.
If you found this story meaningful, please share it with your loved ones. Don't forget to leave a comment below about how you felt. I always cherish and listen to everything you share.
I wish you all peace and happiness in the arms of your family. I'll see you again for the next story. Goodbye for now.